Okay. We're going to be talking about a portrait of fatherhood. Do you remember when men were men and you could tell by looking? When women were the ones who wore the earrings and makeup? Do you remember when men knew who they were and had confidence in themselves? In their Elohim? They knew where Yahweh was leading them and trusted Him to get them there. Maybe the problem today is that our modern society has tried to convince women that they can be as masculine as men, and men that they can be as feminine as women. So we have put them all together in one big mixing bowl and mixed them all up until many are no longer sure what their role really is. Let's take an opportunity to look at masculinity once again, and not the Rambo type who walks with a swagger or cusses like a sailor. Such men probably make bad neighbors and poor business partners and abusive fathers and husbands. Nor am I talking about the Archie Bunker types who sit on his chair like a king on a throne, expecting the whole world to revolve around him. I'm talking about a man who knows he is a man, and he is proud that he is a man, but at the same time he has a tender heart that is sensitive to others and to the will of Yahweh. I'm talking about Yahweh's man. I'm talking about fatherhood the way it ought to be. Where do you find guidance for this? Well, the Bible is always the best source. So I've selected a passage from 1 Thessalonians chapter 2. Few would consider this to be a fatherly text, but I think it's a good one. In 1 Thessalonians chapter 2, verse 7, "But we were gentle among you, even as a nurse cherishes her children. So being affectionately desirous of you, we were willing to have imparted unto you not the gospel of Yahweh only, but also our own souls, because you were dear unto us. For you remember, brethren, our labor and travail, for laboring night and day, because we would not be chargeable unto any of you. We preached unto you the gospel of Yahweh. You are witnesses, and Yahweh also, how holily and justly and unblameable we behaved ourselves among you that believed. As you know how we exhorted and comforted and charged every one of you, as a father does his children, that you would walk worthy of Yahweh, who has called you unto his kingdom in glory." Verses that stand out: we were gentle among you, like a mother caring for her little children. Another verse: we loved you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the good news of Yahweh, but our lives as well. We poured our heart out unto you, because you had become so dear to us. Another verse: surely you remember, brothers, our toil and hardships. We worked night and day in order to be not to be a burden to anyone, while we preach the good news of Yahweh unto you. Another verse: you are witnesses, and so is Yahweh, how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed. Another verse: for you know it, that we dealt with each other of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, urging you to live lives worthy of Yahweh, who calls you unto his kingdom and glory. Let me suggest that in these few verses we see a portrait of fatherhood that is worthy of examining. And as you look at the portrait, consider 5 wonderful traits a father needs today. Able to express genuine love. The first trait of a father would be the ability to express genuine love. Notice what Paul says in verse 8. We loved you so much. In the Greek language, the word expressed as the love is intensity of love that gives over and over again. Paul is saying it's hard even to find words to express how much love we have for you. But we really do love you. Agape love is what the word is, number 27, means beloved, esteemed, dear, fortunate, worthy of love. I think that it's an important character trait for fathers because expressing love does not come naturally for most men. I'm convinced that is the reason the Bible tells husbands to love your wives, because we have to learn how to. The Bible almost never tells wives to love their husbands, because that usually comes naturally for them. Instead, wives are told to respect their husband because sometimes that's hard to do. Men, most of us have to learn how to express love. That is true about the father and child relationship too. It doesn't usually come easy for us. Now, I never had kids of my own, but I have been blessed with 2 people who honor me with the title of Pop. Perhaps some of you remember when you brought your own first child home. Your wife seemed to know what to do. She knew the head was heavy and that the muscles had not developed in the neck and to support it, so she supported it. She also knew that the soft spot on the top of the head was a place of vulnerability and you had to be really careful about it. She knew when the baby was hungry and when the diaper needed to be changed, and she changed it with skill. She knew when it was bath time and play time and sleep time. She knew all those things. Even if you didn't have any children yourselves, you might have been exposed to babies through other family members. But we men had a lot to learn. When we first held the baby, at least for many of us, it was an awkward experience. I didn't know when the baby was hungry and when the diaper needed to be changed. And I was not very skilled at changing the diaper. And all those things had to be learned. And soon we get to the place where even if we're not so good at them, we kind of enjoy them. We enjoy holding our children. We enjoy playing with them, watching them laugh and comforting them when they are in distress. Then what happens? They grow up, and just about the time we get good at it, it all changes. A few years ago, a cartoon strip, for better or for worse, showed Dad coming into a room with his teenage daughter, was sitting on the couch watching television and munching on popcorn. So he decides to sit down next to her and help himself to the popcorn. And as he's sitting there, a little thought balloon appears over his head, and he's thinking, I remember when she was so young. I held her in my arms and loved her. And it was wonderful. Now look at her. She's all grown up, and such a beautiful girl too. I wonder what she'd would think if I held her like I used to. To hold her again and tell her that I love her. He finally concludes that she would be uncomfortable if he did that. And while he's thinking all of that I just read you, his daughter is thinking, I wonder why Dad never hugs me anymore. Isn't it sad that we have arrived at a time in our culture where there's so much incest and perversion that dads, we're not even sure how to express love anymore. We're not sure what's proper and what's not proper. Our best example of fatherhood, of course, is our Father in heaven. And the best story to show that is the story of the prodigal son. The reason this is so universally applicable is that many have experienced what the prodigal son experienced, where we are sure we know better than our parents. We have it all figured out. You know the story. The son goes off into a far country and squanders all of his money, and when he runs out of money, he runs out of friends. He ends up in a hog wallow, eating from the slop that is fed to the pigs. This is the most humiliating place for a Jewish boy could possibly be. And as he sits there, the Bible says, he came to his senses and he starts thinking, how many of my father's hired men have food to spare, and here I am starving to death. I will set out and go back to my father. Luke 15, 17 and 18. Verse 17 and 18. Now notice something important. He felt that he could go back to his father. The relationship might never be the same, but he knew the door was open to him. How did he know that? All through the time of raising his son, the father had communicated his love. No matter how far you go, you can always come back home again. That kind of love is a vital thing to communicate to our children. He said, I will say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired men. So, up he went to his father. I think it was a speech he practiced every step of his way back home. He had it down, but before he could blurt it out, his father had run to him and thrown his arms around him and kissed him. The father had no fear of expressing love. You know, the beautiful part is that our Father in heaven always leaves the door open for us to come home again. And as dads, we need to teach our kids, no matter how deep their sin, you can always come home. And there will be a Father waiting to throw his arms around you and to assure you of his abiding love. The second trait is a transparent life, and Paul writes in 1 Thessalonians 2:8, we love you so much that we were delighted to share with you not only the gospel of Yahweh, but our lives as well, because you were so dear to us. Now notice that there is a connection between gospel and lives. It is one thing to hear the gospel, but it's another thing to live it. Paul is saying, when we lived among you, we not only told you the good news, we modeled it for you by how we lived. It seems to me that if you're a believer, your kids ought to know it by now, by the way you live. For example, being a believer will affect the decisions you make every day. The values in your home will be different than those found in pagan homes. A pagan home values things like pleasure and power and prestige and possessions. But in a believer's home, we learn that things we can't see, things we can't buy, things we can't hold on to are really the most precious. We have completely different values in the world. What about stress? Would you deal with stress differently if you were a believer than if you were not? I think you would. because there is a peace available to you that the world doesn't understand. A peace that passes all understanding. What about finances? How about budgeting your money? Wouldn't that be affected by how the gospel has changed your life and made you into a different person? What about humor, joy, and laughter? All the things we find in a home influenced by the gospel. A man by the name of Robert Fulghum became popular when he wrote a book entitled Everything I Needed to Know I Learned in Kindergarten. Then he wrote another book, and in it he talks about grown children coming home again. He says that it's normal when grown kids come back home to reminisce about things they got by with when they were younger that mom and dad never found out about. He recalled that when his children began reminiscing, that his oldest son said, "Dad, when I was 14 and you and Mom were gone for a while, I went out to the garage and got in the car, started it up, backed it out, drove it around the block several times, and then put it back in the garage, and you never knew it." Everybody laughed, and then he went on, "Another time when you and Mom went to the grocery store, we kids went out to the backyard and smoked a cigar. You came home early and we thought for sure you had caught us, but you never knew it, and we got away with it." Once again, everybody laughed, and it was a bonding time for them all. Then Fulghum told his children, "You didn't know some of the things your mom and I got by with. For instance, you never knew that we took a cut off the money Grandma sent you at Christmas. You never knew that sometimes when we told you we weren't serving leftovers, that they really were leftovers disguised in some other way. You never knew that when you called me from camp and you were so homesick and I told you that I missed you, I lied." And he went on, "I know who sent you those anonymous Valentine cards, and I know who got into my wallet and took money, and I never said so. And there were times when I let you lie to me because the truth was too hard for either of us to hear. And there were times when I told you that I loved you when I didn't love anybody, not even myself. That's transparency. That's hard to deal with. But I think kids need to see their fathers not just as authority figures, but someone who is real, someone whose heart has been touched and changed, who still makes mistakes and yet has the courage to admit that he has made those mistakes. And here's a third trait, unselfish diligence. Paul says, "You remember, brothers, our toil and hardship. We work night and day in order not to be a burden to anyone while we preach the gospel of Yahweh to you." Now I think we have a responsibility as parents to teach a good work ethics to our children. And oftentimes, our kids don't see a father who is a hard worker and who has a good work ethic. They will never learn it. We teach it in two ways. First, we teach by example, by just doing it, letting our children see that. And secondly, our children learn by doing. We give them the opportunity to do things and make their own mistakes and learn from the mistakes that they make. I'm reminded of a story of a little boy who was not very artistic, who was trying to draw a horse on a piece of paper, and his father, who was an artist, watched as he did. And the little boy was clumsy, and his father tried to help him, and he started giving him advice, which really didn't help very much. Finally, the father took the piece of paper, drew a beautiful horse, and handed it back, saying, "Here, this is the way you do it." The son turned and looked at his dad and said, "But Dad, I want to draw my own horse. Every child has to draw his or her own horse. And as dads, we have to be wise enough to step back and let them do that, to make their own mistakes and learn from those mistakes. Fourth, the trait of genuine spirituality. Paul said, "You are witnesses, and so is Yahweh, of how holy, righteous, and blameless we were among you who believed." Now, let's review what Paul said to them. Back in verse 9, he said, "First of all, we preach the gospel of Yahweh to you." And now he adds, "You are witnesses, and so is Yahweh, of how we lived among you. We lived holy, righteous, and blameless lives. Our behavior was influenced by what we believed about Yeshua, Yahweh's Son." Yahweh has commissioned dads to be spiritual leaders, and you are the spiritual leader of your home, whether you realize it or not. You will either lead your family closer to Yahweh or further away. But as a believer, it is your responsibility to lead them closer to Him. If you don't, you will be leading them closer to the evil one and his kingdom. As spiritual leaders, it's our responsibility to show that we are genuine, that our belief is not just something for Sabbath, but something we are all week long. So if you come to church and carry your Bible and look very pious on Sabbath, but you never open it through the week, your kids will know. They will be watching you, and they will know. If you pray here on Sabbath day when everyone else is praying, but you never pray at home, your kids will know. So it's absolutely essential that we be genuine, that our children see that we not only worship here in church, but that we worship at home. We not only read the word of Yahweh here, but we read it at home. We not only pray here, but that we pray every day of our lives at home, and that we see the genuineness of your faith. Finally, there is this trait of positive influence. Paul writes, "For you know that we dealt with each of you as a father deals with his own children, encouraging, comforting, and urging you to live lives worthy of Yahweh, who calls you into his kingdom and glory." That is what a father does. He encourages. He comforts. He urges his children to live lives worthy of Yahweh. It's all positive. But not every dad is a positive influence. This is Brian's story. Brian says, "I was just 12 years old when my Boy Scout troop planned a father and son camp out, and I was thrilled, and I could hardly wait to rush home and give my father all the information. I wanted so much to show him all that I've learned in scouting, and I was so proud that he said he'd go with me. Friday, the camp out finally came, and I had all my gear out on the porch, ready to stuff in the car the moment he arrived. We were all to meet at the school at 5 p.m. to go to the campground, but Dad didn't get home from work until 7. I was frantic, but he explained that things had gone wrong at work and told me not to worry. We will still get up first thing in the morning and join the others. And I was disappointed, of course, but decided to make the best of it. First thing in the morning, I was up and had everything in his car while it was still getting light, all ready for us to catch up with my friends and their fathers at the campground. Dad had said we'd leave around 7 a.m., and I was ready half hour before that. But he didn't even come out of the bedroom until 9 a.m. When he saw me standing out front with the camping gear, he finally explained that he had a bad back and couldn't sleep on the ground, and he hoped I understand and that I'd be a big boy about it. But could I please get my things out of his car because he had several commitments he had to keep. Just about the hardest thing I ever done was to go to the car and take out my sleeping bag and cook stove and pup tent and supplies. And then while I was putting my stuff away in the storage shed and he thought I couldn't see, I watched him carry his golf clubs out and throw them in his trunk and drive away to keep his commitments. That's when I realized my dad never meant to go with me to the campout. It didn't matter to him, but his golfing buddies did. That's so very sad, isn't it? Dan Benson, in his book, The Total Man, says that for every positive word most dads say to their children, they say 10 negative words. They are good at words like don't, you can't, stop that, no. But they are not very good at the positive words. Benson suggests that we could change a whole personality of our relationship with our children if we learn to be positive and influence things in a positive way. A man by the name of Charlie Shedd writes about moving his family from Kansas to Oklahoma, and he said that there was a big roll of baler twine he had saved for some reason, but he never used it. So as they were getting ready to move, he told his son Philip, I don't want you to mess with the baler twine. That's special, so please don't touch it. He said that must have been like sickum to a dog, for almost every day he found that he had been playing with his baling twine, and he would lecture him and tell him please don't play with it, but it seemed like a magnet that kept pulling him back. Then one day he came home from work, and there the baling twine was almost everywhere, and it was stretched and crisscrossed all across the garage door. And he said, as I started cutting my way through just to get to the car into the garage, I rehearsed the lecture I was going to give my son. But he said, as I cut away, I started thinking, what am I going to do with this baling twine? And then he realized that maybe the baling twine was not nearly that important. So he said that night when he sat down at the evening meal, they said prayers and thanked God for the food, and Philip remained with his head bowed. And I said, Philip, about that baling twine. Philip's head bowed even lower, and you could tell he was really disturbed. And then Charlie Shedd said, Philip, I've decided that baling twine is not worth nearly as much as you are. You're really a special son, and I love you a bunch. If you want to play with the baling twine, just help yourself. And then the father added, Philip never touched the baling twine again. Now that's what I call a positive influence. That's what I call love. Yahweh bless.